A man's life is taken in the dead of night. The weapon, a knife, no fingerprints, no sign of forced entry. A daughter found standing over his body, the only one at the scene. A story that seems clear at first: self-defense, a tragic moment of violence. But as the investigation unfolds, the truth begins to slip through the cracks. Was this a case of an innocent girl fighting back after years of torment? Or had something far more complex, something buried in the past, led to this deadly confrontation? In the days that follow, everyone wants answers. What really happened between father and daughter? And why, in that final moment, did she choose to end it all? In the end, the real question isn't who killed him, but why she had no other choice. This is the story of Clara Evans and the shocking death of her adoptive father, John Evans. And it begins with a phone call that would change everything. It was a cold, ordinary evening on March 14th, in the quiet town of Westbridge, when a phone call shattered the stillness. A call that would spark the unraveling of a life that many thought they understood. A call that would leave an entire community questioning the very nature of family. The police arrived at the Evans household just after 10:30 p.m. What greeted them was a scene that would be seared into their memories forever. John Evans, 53 years old, a successful businessman, and a well-respected father in the town, lay dead in the living room of his home. The weapon, a kitchen knife, plunged deep into his chest. No sign of a break-in, no forced entry, no struggle with an intruder. But there was one person in the house: Clara Evans, his adopted daughter, the only witness to the crime. Wait, before you see this insane story, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. And if this video shocks you, trust me, it will. Smash that subscribe button and hit the bell, because we drop even crazier videos every week, and you don't want to miss them. Clara was found standing over her father's body, her face frozen in shock, her hands trembling with the weight of what had just happened, still holding the knife that had ended a life. The police found her in a daze, her eyes wide and filled with confusion. Yet there was something in her expression, something cold, something they couldn't quite place. For years, Clara had lived with John and his wife, Susan, in this grand home that seemed to have everything: money, comfort, the appearance of a perfect family. But appearances can be deceiving, and the house that once echoed with laughter now stood still, empty, its walls bearing the heavy silence of tragedy. The cozy living room, where countless family memories had been made, now felt like a tomb. The soft light from the fireplace flickered as if it too were grieving the loss of a man who had, for so long, been a stranger to his own family. Clara's mind raced as she tried to explain what had happened, but each word seemed to add more questions than answers. What led her to this moment? What had been simmering beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family? Was this a case of self-defense? Or had something darker been lurking beneath the facade of the Evans family? Clara's story seemed impossible to believe. A life of abuse, of fear, of a secret violence that had been hidden in plain sight. And yet, the details painted a picture no one could ignore. The investigation would soon reveal that the truth was not what anyone expected. The walls that held the secrets of a broken family had begun to crumble, and in their place, a chilling reality emerged. This was not the family everyone thought they knew. Everything they thought they knew about Clara Evans and John Evans was about to be turned on its head. And the search for the truth had only just begun. John's troubled past was something few knew about, something he carefully kept hidden behind his facade of success. He had been married before, and his first wife had tragically died in a car accident when Clara was just a toddler. He'd adopted her, taken her into his life when no one else would. But from the beginning, their relationship was complicated. Clara, only 5 years old when John took her in, was never truly his child. She was a stranger, an unfamiliar presence in a home where love was supposed to flourish. And so, instead of being the father he had promised to be, John became an emotionally distant man, his coldness cloaked by the mask of duty. Clara Evans was just 16 when she came to live with John and Susan. A girl full of hope, at least that's how she appeared on the outside. With her bright brown eyes and soft, curly hair, She was the image of innocence. But as she grew older, the cracks began to show. Clara was quiet, distant, always watching from the shadows, never quite fitting in. There was something about her that no one could understand. A coldness, perhaps, a reserve that kept everyone at arm's length. She had learned to be that way, to hide behind her silence. But in the privacy of their home, away from the prying eyes of the world, her life with John Evans was anything but peaceful. Behind closed doors, John's relationship with Clara was marked by years of tension, unspoken anger, and abuse that no one saw coming. John's temper was infamous, known only to those who had been closest to him. His outbursts were unpredictable, violent, like a storm that could strike without warning. And Clara, with no place else to turn, was left to bear the brunt of it all. His cruelty was subtle but cutting. His words could wound deeper than any weapon, and the physical abuse, though hidden beneath layers of time, was real. But Clara, for all her quietness, had learned to survive. And by the time she turned 18, she had reached a breaking point. A point where the fear of living another day under John's roof seemed unbearable. As the investigation unfolded, Clara's story seemed to shift with each retelling. At first, she claimed it was self-defense, that she had acted out of sheer fear, fighting for her life in the very moment her father had attacked her. But the details, those small fragments of truth, didn't quite add up. The police had no reason to doubt her words. But as the investigation delved deeper, things started to change. The first responders who arrived on the scene found a calmness in Clara that they hadn't expected. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even shocked. She was eerily composed, like someone who had been through this before. And that, more than anything, raised a red flag for the officers. Detective Rachel Carter was the first to take charge of the case. A seasoned investigator, Rachel had worked on cases that dealt with far more gruesome details than this. But even she felt an unsettling chill when she walked into the Evans home. The scene didn't feel right. It was too clean, too perfect. A woman in her 40s, Rachel had seen it all. Violent crimes, messy murders, families torn apart by secrets. But this one made her uneasy. Police had been quick to label Clara's actions as self-defense, until they uncovered something that didn't quite fit. The knife found next to John's body didn't show signs of a struggle. It was placed too carefully in the position it was found. And then there was Clara's story, which seemed to change every time she spoke. First, it was a desperate fight for her life. Then, she spoke of threats, of constant fear. But there was no solid evidence to corroborate her claims. No neighbors who had heard anything. No signs of recent injuries on Clara that would support her story. And yet, there was something about her demeanor that didn't sit right with Detective Carter. Was this a crime of passion, a final act of rage brought on by years of abuse? Or was Clara hiding something far darker? Had she been pushed to the brink of violence by the man who was supposed to protect her? Or was this something far more calculated? A decision made in cold blood after years of silence. The deeper the investigation went, the more questions arose. Clara had a troubled past, yes, but was this a moment of escape or a deliberate act? And what about John? Was there more to his death than met the eye? Was the truth buried under layers of pain and anger, waiting to be uncovered? What happened in that house on the night of March 14th? The answers weren't as clear as anyone hoped. And the investigation was just beginning to peel back the layers of a family, and a crime, unlike any other. When investigators first arrived at the Evans residence, the scene seemed straightforward, too straightforward. A man, dead in his own home, and his adopted daughter, Clara Evans, standing over him, dazed, a knife in her hand. At first glance, it looked like a simple case of self-defense. A girl, defending herself against the violent man who had tormented her for years. The evidence, though, would soon tell a much more complicated story. The police found John Evans lying motionless on the floor, a blood-stained kitchen knife beside him. The wound was fatal, a single deep stab to the chest. But there was something off. No sign of forced entry. The door had been unlocked, yes, but it was as if the house had never been disturbed. The usual signs of a struggle were missing. No overturned furniture, no broken glass. Just an immaculate living room and a lifeless body. The perfect picture of a crime scene. But when Clara spoke, her story raised more questions than it answered. Clara, still in a state of shock, claimed it was self-defense. She told officers she had been cornered by John, that he had attacked her in a fit of rage. But the problem was this: her version of events kept changing. First, she said she was defending herself from an immediate threat. Then, she spoke of years of abuse, physical and emotional, at the hands of John. But no one had ever witnessed any of this. The neighbors had never seen bruises on Clara, and there were no reports of violence before that night. And yet, despite Clara's shifting story, the evidence was undeniable. The bloody knife, yes, but also something else. A phone call, made by Clara to a close friend just minutes before the murder. The conversation, however, was odd. Clara had mentioned nothing of a physical altercation or of fear. Instead, she spoke as if she were simply venting. She sounded calm, almost distant, as if she were talking about something far removed from the chaos that was about to unfold in her home. More strange occurrences surfaced as the investigation progressed. Clara had a bruise on her arm. A small, fading mark that didn't match the intense story of violence she had told. The marks didn't look like they had been caused by John. And even more curiously, the kitchen knife found by John's body didn't show signs of struggle, either. It had been carefully placed beside him, almost as if it had been set down, not thrown, not left in haste, but placed with deliberate intention. As the pieces of the puzzle started to come together, a troubling thought began to emerge. What if this wasn't an act of self-defense? What if Clara had made a choice, one that had been simmering for years? What if the death of John Evans wasn't a desperate act but something far more calculated? Something that had been planned in the shadows of her life? The investigation began to uncover more than anyone expected. Clara, it seemed, had been hiding something far darker. Detective Rachel Carter discovered that Clara had been in contact with an unknown individual in the days leading up to the murder. An accomplice, perhaps? A friend? Or someone who knew more than they should? Investigators traced the phone numbers Clara had been calling, and though there were no direct links to another suspect, the connections pointed to a tangled web of secrets, lies, and hidden motives. Could there have been another person involved in John Evans' death? Was Clara working with someone who knew the inner workings of the Evans family better than anyone? Or was she, as some of the detectives speculated, the victim of years of torment, pushed to the breaking point by the man who had raised her? And what of the strange phone call, the one made minutes before the murder? Who was Clara talking to? What did they know? And what part, if any, did they play in the events of that night? Clara's story, once so clear, was now a tangled knot of inconsistencies. The investigation revealed fractures in her narrative, moments where the timeline didn't align, where the details didn't match. And as more evidence surfaced, it became clear. There was more to this story than anyone could have imagined. What if the violence Clara claimed was only the surface? What if this was the final act in a much larger drama? What if the true killer wasn't just the man who died that night, but the years of suffering that had led to that fatal moment? The evidence, once so straightforward, was beginning to unravel in ways no one had anticipated. The truth about what happened in the Evans household that night was slipping further out of reach, replaced by more questions, more theories, and more possibilities. Was this a crime of passion? A broken victim finally taking her revenge? Or was it something far more chilling? A carefully orchestrated act by a daughter who had lived in the shadow of a monster for too long. Just when it seemed like the investigation had reached its peak, when every lead had been exhausted, and every possible theory had been tested, a revelation came that no one had seen coming. It was a truth buried so deeply beneath years of silence, so well hidden behind the carefully constructed walls of the Evans family, that it had remained undetected until now. As Detective Rachel Carter sat down with Clara once again, something was different. This time, the questions weren't about what had happened in the moments before John's death. No, this time they were about Clara's past, her life before that night. And as Rachel asked her about her childhood, about the time she spent under John's roof, Clara's walls began to crack. Clara, with trembling hands and a voice barely above a whisper, finally admitted something she had kept locked away for years. She spoke of the years of abuse, of the violence that had been hidden from the world, from the people who saw John as the perfect father. Clara revealed, in her own words, what had always been missing from the story. The evidence didn't just point to a tragic murder. It pointed to something much darker, a life destroyed by years of abuse, covered up by a family desperate to maintain their image. And it pointed to a failure of everyone who had ever known Clara and never saw the signs. A failure of a community that allowed a predator to hide behind the mask of a loving father. For Clara, the act of violence had been a final, irreversible choice. A choice to end the years of suffering. A choice that had been forced upon her after so much pain. She had reached a breaking point, and when John came at her that night, with anger in his eyes, something inside her snapped. In that moment, it wasn't just about surviving him. It was about surviving the life he had forced upon her. And so, Clara made her choice. She chose to end it, to end the life she had known. A life filled with fear, humiliation, and regret. But in doing so, she also destroyed the only thing she had left, the chance at freedom. She had become a victim of her circumstances, of a life she never asked for. But in the eyes of the law, she had taken a life. And that was a truth she would have to live with forever. The investigation had uncovered the truth, but it was a truth that left as many questions as answers. Was Clara a victim of a broken system? Or was she something darker? Someone capable of hiding her true nature behind the mask of a broken child? In the end, it wasn't just about who killed John Evans. It was about why no one had ever seen Clara for who she really was. What really happened that night? Was this the tragic and inevitable outcome of years of abuse, a desperate act of survival after Clara had been pushed to her breaking point? Or, as some would argue, was there more to the story? Was Clara's choice to end John's life one of necessity? Or was there something else buried deep within her that no one saw coming? The trial that followed was a spectacle. Emotions ran high as the details of Clara's past came to light. She pled guilty to manslaughter, a lesser charge than murder, but a conviction that still carried immense weight. Yet, as the trial unfolded, many began to question whether the punishment truly fit the crime. Could someone who had endured such years of torment, someone who had been ignored and overlooked by the very system designed to protect her, truly be held fully accountable for her actions? So, what do you think? Was this a case of self-defense, a final act of survival by a girl who had been pushed to the edge? Or did Clara cross a line that, once crossed, could never be undone? Could anyone, after all that she had endured, truly be held accountable for that final, fateful choice? Was John Evans a predator who deserved the fate that befell him, or was he, too, a victim of his own darkness? What part did the system play in allowing this tragedy to unfold? And most importantly, what does this case say about us? About the stories we choose to ignore, about the pain we fail to see until it's too late. This story, though tragic, is a reminder of the dangers of silence, of how easy it is to look the other way, of how a broken system can create monsters, and sometimes how it forces the innocent to become them. We may never know the full truth, but the question remains: who is really to blame for the pain that Clara Evans endured, and for the life that was lost that night? Was it the predator, the victim, or was it something much larger? A world that let them both fall through the cracks. Let us know your thoughts. What do you think? Was Clara's decision truly an act of survival? Or did she cross a line that no one could ever come back from? Now that you've heard the facts, now that you've seen the story unfold, layer by layer, exposing the darkest truths hidden behind a seemingly perfect family, what's your theory? Was this truly an act of justice, a final cry for help from a girl pushed to the edge? Or was it simply another tragedy, a life taken, with no real answers to the questions it leaves behind? This case is far from simple. It's a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the families we think we know, about the systems meant to protect us, and about the lengths someone might go to in order to survive. But in the end, only you can decide. Was Clara's choice a desperate act of survival, or something far darker that we have yet to fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think happened in that house that night? Was Clara's story one of survival, or was she someone capable of far more than we've been led to believe? We want to hear from you. This is more than just a case. It's a conversation about justice, about pain, and about what happens when silence is allowed to grow too loud. Don't forget to like this video if you think the truth is more complicated than we're told. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an episode of the most gripping true crime stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. And if you know someone who loves unraveling dark mysteries, someone who thrives on discovering the truth, share this video with them. Let's see what they think. Because the mystery doesn't end here. It never does. And the search for the truth, well, that's something we all share. So what's your theory? What's your truth?